When you're just starting out, stick welding and flux cord are both good options, but which is the best process for you to use? Let's break that down here in this video. Hey, welcome to the shop. We're gonna break down several things you might wanna consider when you're trying to decide between these processes. But before we do, let's talk about how the processes work to make sure we're all on the same page. Let's start first with stick welding, and it is more properly known as shielded metal arc welding. With stick welding, you use a coated electrode. So the center is steel usually, or at least the material that you're gonna be welding, and it's coated with a coating called flux. But you take that center core, it's exposed at one end, and you clamp it in an electrode holder, and that allows electricity to flow through the electrode there, and then you put a clamp on the piece you're gonna be welding. That completes a circuit when you touch the end of the electrode to it and pull it away, creating a little bit of a gap. Electricity flows over that gap, creating an arc that's really hot, and it melts the base metal and also melts the electrode that you're using to add material to your weld. Now here's where the flux coating comes in. When all that material is so hot and it's molten, you need to protect it from the elements in the air so it doesn't have chemical reactions that cause contamination. So that flux does that job. It burns off, shields the weld, and it leaves a coating over the top called slag, and when you chip that off, there's your final weld. Flux core welding works in a relatively similar way to stick welding, except the electrode, rather than being a relatively short stick that's pretty large in diameter, it's a smaller diameter wire that's coiled up inside the machine usually, and it's fed out with an electric motor out of a gun like this. So as it melts off, wire continues to be added to the puddle. Well, you can't have flux on the outside of a wire like this, so the wire is actually a tube, and it has flux down through the middle to do the same job as the flux when you're stick welding. So that's how the two processes work. Why would you want to pick one over another? Now, the first thing you need to consider when you're trying to choose between these processes is how thick is the material that you're going to weld. So stick welding on really thin metal, while it's kind of possible, it's really, really difficult. So I recommend stick welding only on 1/8 of an inch, that's 3 millimeter thick steel and thicker. But along with that, one thing you get with stick welding is just a basic stick welding machine. Not a lot of amperage can weld unlimited thickness by running multiple passes. So it has the advantage of being able to have a really strong weld on really thick material. But if you're welding a lot of thin stuff, I really wouldn't go there. Flux core welding, on the other hand, can run really thin material clear down into the sheet metal thicknesses. Here you can see me running a T-joint on 1/16 inch material, no problem at all. So it's great for that. However, if you want to run really thick metal, a machine like this dedicated flux core welder is going to run out of steam just a little over 1/8 of an inch. You might be able to run 1/4 inch with it, but you're really kind of pushing the limits there. You might be wondering, well, can't I just run multiple passes? It depends on the wire. Some flux core wire will lose properties and it won't have a really sound weld when you run multiple passes on it. So you need to look at the data sheet for whatever wire you're running if that's something you're planning on. But either way, you're gonna struggle to have a sound weld on really thick metal. So thinner metal, gonna be better for flux core. Thicker metal is gonna be better with stick welding. Another consideration is how much time do you have to learn a welding process? So it's not like a drill where you just buy it, throw in a bit and drill a hole and it's pretty simple. There is a learning curve to any welding process. It takes some practice and some effort. So stick welding is going to take a fair bit more time to learn than flux core welding will for most people. So with stick welding, when you go to strike an arc, there's a tendency for the electrode to stick to your metal, so you need to learn to overcome that. And then you also have the electrode burning off, so you need to learn the motion where you move in towards your weld. It's not extremely difficult to learn. However, it will take a bit of time and a bit of practice if you want to feel confident going into welds that you'll be able to run them. Flux core welding, on the other hand, while it will take some practice, is relatively straightforward. As long as you hold this gun with a consistent length to the workpiece, you have the right angle to the workpiece, and you're moving consistently, then you are going to be able to get a pretty good weld right away. With either of these processes, I have some online courses that could help. I'll link in the description if you want a little bit of help with that. Hey, before we go on to the next items to consider, we need to take a break to thank this video's sponsor. This video is sponsored by Kamikoto Knives. They make these really nice kitchen knives out of high-end Japanese steel that's been through a 19-step manufacturing process that's overseen by their bladesmiths with over 100 years of combined experience. I've been using these in the kitchen, and they are just so much fun. It's like that is how a knife is supposed to work. I've been cutting fruits, vegetables, meat, and whenever you have a good quality tool, there's just a difference compared with, others that I've used. And that's what I'm seeing here. They inspect each one and guarantee it for life and then package it up in this high quality ash wood box. So it makes a great gift. It comes with that, and it's a great place to keep your knives nice and safe. Kamikoto has several special offers going on right now and is offering my viewers an extra $50 off any purchase with the discount code TimWelds50. That's on top of any of their existing special offers. All right, let's get back into the welding here. So one other thing to consider is how much welding are you going to do overall and how often are you going to weld? And there are two different aspects to this. One is if you are only welding a few times a year, keeping your skills sharp with stick welding is going to be quite a bit more difficult than it will be with flux core welding. However, if you are doing a lot of welding, assuming that you can use either process, you're somewhere in that 1/8 of an inch thick or thicker range, stick welding will be able to run quite a bit faster. Now, flux core welding can run fast on the right machine if you have a big MIG welder you're doing it with, but most of us here, we're talking these smaller dedicated machines, and you just end up moving relatively slowly, which is nice from a skills perspective. But from a productivity perspective, trying to get something done, you're going to be able to move quite a bit faster with stick welding, so that's really nice. Also, the aesthetics of the weld with flux core welding, you're usually going to have quite a bit of spatter right around the weld region, where you can get a nice clean weld with a stick welder running certain types of electrodes. So if you're doing a lot of welding, stick welding is usually the way to go, assuming either process would work for you. The last thing that I'll throw out to consider is, what are your long-term welding goals? Are you looking to become a professional? Are you trying to get into this as a field? Because if you are looking to do it career-wise and you're comparing these two processes to get started, stick welding is going to be a much better option because you're going to be able to get a better job doing that. It's a more difficult skill to learn and more marketable than running flux core welding. And I think it would really help you to get your foot in the door to be able to learn more advanced processes. All right, well, let's just summarize. If you're going to be welding thin material, like thinner than 1/8 of an inch or 3 millimeters, flux core welding is going to be a better option for you. On the other hand, if you're going to be welding thicker material, like thicker than 1/4 inch or 6 millimeters, stick welding is going to be the way to go. In that middle range there, you could really pick either process and be just fine. So just consider some of the things we've talked about with how often you're going to weld and what are your long-term welding goals. Do you want to go to the effort to learn a more complicated process in stick welding, or are you happy with running something a little bit simpler with flux core and you just want to make cool stuff and have it stay together? So those are your options there. Hey, thanks for tuning in today. I'll put a bunch of links down in the description for some of the things we've talked about and some other helpful videos. Until next time, weld safe, and we'll see you then.